I'd like to welcome you all to this extraordinary meeting, but before we get on with the business, I've got a couple of notices to give. And the first one is, sadly, former councillor Marjorie Ann Beestall, OBE-JP, passed away on the 28th of May. Marjorie first represented Allington Ward on Alveston and Bolton Parish Council before being elected in 1968 to Derby Corporation as a member for Chellaston until 1971. In that time, she served with distinction on Derby's local education authority as chairman of its primary school subcommittee and took a leading role in reorganising schools in Derby in the change to comprehensive education. In 1986, she was elected to serve as county councillor for Darley electoral division in the city of Derby, a post she held until Derby regained unitary status in 1997. Marjorie was a Derby magistrate and for many years served as chairman of the bench. Councillors Keith, Webb and Wood represented the City Council at her funeral on the 17th of June. I propose that we have a minute's silence to remember Marjorie and also a minute's silence to remember the Battle of the Somme. Thank you. Thank you. Can I just remind councillors and people in the public gallery to put their phones on silent? Thank you. Do we have any apologies for this evening? Councillor Barker.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Sean Marshall and Councillor John Smale.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Alan Graves.
Thank you. Is there any declarations of interest? No? Right. So we'll move on to the main body of the meeting, the report in the public interest prepared by Grant Thornton for the audit of accounts 2013-14 and 2014-15 governance issues.
You want to introduce Philip Jones, who's the auditor?
I'd like to introduce Mr. Philip Jones as the auditor, who will now present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you all hear me okay? I'll do a relatively short introduction to the report, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions members may have. An awful lot of water has passed under the bridge since this report was published on 16th of June. Against the backdrop of a political picture nationally of considerable volatility, members might be tempted to consider that the events considered by our report are in the past and that the Council has bigger issues to grapple with. That would be a misconception in our view. The report is fundamentally about governance and in plain English about the way you do things as a council. And that matters now more than ever, in my view. What do I mean by this? This goes to the heart of why we determined to carry out the investigations which led ultimately to publication of this report. In 2013-14 and 2014-15, your own annual governance statements for those years identified serious weaknesses in the way you do things. An investigation was underway, which was only completed in March 2015, which led to a number of senior officers leaving the Council and a number of more junior officers also departing, associated with the implementation of the job evaluation scheme. They left because they had not done the right thing, and their failures to properly evaluate and to report emerging risks came with a human cost and a financial cost of around 1.2 million. So the way that you do things, if not done well, can both erode confidence and put the Council under unnecessary financial stress. The report states that the Council has achieved a lot over recent years, and that is undeniable. The launch of the Derby Arena is probably the best example of that. So we're not talking about a council which has not had considerable strengths, but it had a culture which had some flaws in it. Some senior officers did not report big risks to members, and other officers evidently felt scared to report bad news. The story of the report is predominantly about officer failures, but it's fair to ask whether there were any contributory reasons as to why a small number of officers did not always act in the right way. They said that they felt under pressure from politicians and had unmanageable workloads. And whilst we do not accept that as a justification of their failings, they argued that this played a part. And that brings me to the role of members. It's important now more than ever, given the national picture, that you act as positive exemplars for those you represent. Whilst it is clear that members of all parties care passionately about the city and its citizens, the report also highlights a number of examples where the behaviour of the small number of members fell short of what local people might expect. Squabbles in this chamber, allegation and counter-allegation, and interference in the day-to-day running of services such as taxi licensing indicated that some members also needed to examine their own conduct. Member and officer roles were also blurred on occasion. Why does this matter? Because it can lead to a lack of accountability. The report cites evidence, for instance, of officers and members making important decisions with significant financial consequences in informal meetings which were not minuted. So the basis for those decisions was not transparent. Without transparency, you can't create trust. But finishing on a positive note, most officers and members here we have found are fully committed to delivering great services to the citizens of Derby. We've also commented in our report that we consider that the new leader and management team understand that a more robust approach to governance is essential, and that the management team and officer culture have both strengthened. And most importantly, the Council is committed to learning the lessons from this report, and to that end has produced an action plan to address the failures outlined in this report, which I believe you have before you tonight. It's important as a Council that you develop mechanisms to ensure that those actions are implemented, which will in turn to create confidence. I will stop there and will be happy to answer any questions members may have. However, I hope that you would understand that whilst I will strive to answer any questions fully, I will nonetheless exercise discretion over the way I choose to respond to questions, to stay as close as I can to the facts of the report and to avoid speaking about particular individuals, which would not be fair in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Right, has anybody got any questions? I think we should limit the question time to between 20 and 30 minutes.
Councillor Webb.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I ask if this is a comprehensive report, and does it deal with all the failings that Grant Thornton has found within this council, or is it just the tip of the iceberg?
Well, we've reported all of the findings which we could substantiate on the basis of evidence. An auditor will never claim that he has found all of the bad things going on in the council, nor would he claim that he's ever found all of the good things going on. You are inevitably look at a sample of the activity, and we were focusing our attentions on a couple of areas where we knew there were issues, and also on a number of allegations. Some of those proved to be baseless in our view. So an auditor can never say that they have a comprehensive picture of everything going on, but in terms of this report, these failures in projects illustrate, to our view, the failures of governance which were characteristic of that period in some parts of the way that the council operated.
Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just drawing attention to paragraph 92, in the bullet points, there's no mention of the recommendation the licensing committee passed, which would have barred any councillor who had previously held a taxi licence from sitting on the committee. This was then revoked by the full council a few weeks later. Were you aware of these facts?
I was, but I'll ask the monitoring officers to comment upon that, because I think there was a legal view sought about whether that would be either desirable or lawful.
Councillor Poulter.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Jones, on behalf of my group, myself and my group, for your report, for coming tonight and to present your important findings at the meeting. It's vital for the city's residents that you as an independent person are able to report on the very serious matters contained in your report. You have found in it necessary to report on the actions of a number of council officers and members, as you've referred. The majority of those officers and some of the councillors have since left the council and have faced either discipline proceedings or standard proceedings. There are, however, 4 existing members of the council whose actions in various matters of concern you have identified and highlighted. Will it be within your expectations that the council's action plan to deal with this report would include appropriate measures for those 4 existing members to be called to account for their actions?
It's entirely for the council to determine what actions it takes in relation to this report, and that isn't in essence my concern. My main concern is that you implement the broad findings to put in place systems of governance which address the broad findings. Individual actions in relation to any individual members is the business of the council, not the auditor.
Councillor Repton.
Yes, thank you very much. Page 3, item 10. Page 3, item 10. It said the decision to appoint Aquarius was flawed, as Hay had tendered a lower price for the work, and a referee for Aquarius had questioned whether the firm could deliver Hay evaluations. Could you just remind the meeting, if you wouldn't mind, what date that was? And should the elected members at that time not have been asking some more searching questions than they actually did?
Apologies. The date of appointment of the Aquarius was, from memory, in 26th of March 2012. And I guess to give a contextual answer, I'd say that what we say in the report is that there were a number of failings in the appointment of that firm, and we refer to them in the report. One was they did not accept the lowest tender, and in a case where you do not accept the lowest tender, you should consider the reasons why you are doing that. It's not, you're not always obliged to not accept the lowest tender, but there have to be coherent reasons why. However, in this instance, there were a number of other issues that we identified as failings in that the senior officers involved in overseeing this delivery of this project weren't actually involved in the appointment of the firm, and we see that as not being a sensible process because of the importance of it. And thirdly, we say here that the Hague bid also provided for delivering the pay line modelling, which Aquarius could not offer. So those are three aspects whereby one would have wanted to see the council evaluate these things properly. However, we also point to the fact that several months later, there's a balancing item, which is in effect, because the approach changed to do a more analytical approach, we would argue that at that point, either the contract should have been a new variation to actually get Aquarius to say how they were going to deliver it, or the council should have specified through a written contract or through an additional piece of advice what they required Aquarius to do, which was different from the contract that they tendered for. So there's two phases, one pre and post-election, and there were failings in both areas.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. Mr Jones, I understand that it is an unusual step for Grant Thornton to publish a public interest report, and is no doubt a very significant step as well to actually comment on governance issues, particularly in relation to member conduct. I contain my questions solely in relation to paragraphs 87 to 98 of your report and the three recommendations thereafter. Relating to scale, taking into account that there are many serious issues within the report, can you expand on why you specifically outline concerns regarding member conduct, not only in decision making at taxi licensing subcommittee, but also in relation to policy making of the licensing subcommittee, and what effect this can have on the effective protection of the citizens of Derby?
Thank you. I mean, I guess the paragraph which is relevant in terms of answering your question is paragraph 90. And I guess in that sense, the answer is that you yourself as a council took positive action to look at the way that you delivered that function and the kinds of decisions that you were making. And you as a council, not me, identified the fact that there were a small number of fairly bad decisions being made in relation to the granting of licences. And those are covered in paragraph 90, where we illustrate two of the failures in terms of the licence that you granted and refer to three others. But that was the work that you did yourselves. So in terms of answering your question, I think that covers that. Could you repeat the second part of it? I apologise.
Yes, I mean, it was basically outlining the decision making of subcommittees and also the policy making, and it's the policy making that's of real interest, and what effect this can have on the effective protection of the citizens. I mean, it went on further than that in respect of the paragraphs go on to 98, not just to 90, don't they?
I guess in that sense, what we're talking about is being clear that when you have a statutory committee, that you are making decisions which accord with the guidelines within which you work. And the guidelines within which you work is about whether a person is a fit and proper person to drive a taxi. And we've seen failings both in terms of individual decisions in the past, but also the processes whereby those decisions were made. We actually think you have much better processes in place now to be able to make sure that those things don't happen. And I think our review of more recent cases, certainly by your own staff, would seem to indicate that fewer poor decisions are being made.
Thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to ask a question. When you said you didn't want to point a finger at individuals, that's fine. But we're all councillors, and those councillors have done absolutely nothing wrong. Should be made to be clear. For instance, I pulled up outside a co-op on Sussex Circus, And I've just had a new mobility car, and someone said to me, "What is that part of the 2.2 million you wasted?" I never knew anything about it. And I'm up for election next time, and I don't want that sort of accusation following me around. So although it won't be right to name certain individuals, perhaps the parties that were not concerned, there's only two of us, so they know it's going to be, usually two of enough to satisfy this chamber that UKIP do something wrong. But now we need it tacked for us. I'd say it wasn't any UKIP people.
I can only really comment very briefly that what the report acknowledges was that the failings reported in this report involved a small number of officers and a small number of members. And by default, clearly, a large number of officers and a large number of members were doing the right thing.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr Jones, there's a sort of underlying feeling within your report about the culture within the council in terms of between members and officers. But there isn't a specific recommendation that looks at that. So I just wondered if you had, in terms of trying to improve those relationships, apart from the manner in which we are told our roles should the limits of where our roles are. So it's addressing the essence of what we should be doing, but not looking at the underlying culture. And I just wondered whether you had any advice in terms of looking at underlying culture and the way in which we behave towards each other, and the way in which maybe senior officers and more junior officers behave towards each other, and whether that is something that comes within an audit remit.
I mean, you're right, there isn't a specific recommendation looking through which relates to that. I mean, it's implicit rather than explicit within the report. And to be honest, it's an issue which all councils grapple with, because there isn't a black and white answer to where is the cut-off line between the roles of a member and a role of an officer. That will always vary depending on circumstances. If officers aren't delivering, it's quite right for members to be perhaps a bit more assertive in what they do. If officers are delivering very well within the remit that they're given by members, it's not appropriate in those circumstances for members to micromanage them. And that's broadly what's been set out in lots of advice, which has come from the LGC, it's come from SIPFA and other governance bodies. It's about getting the balance right so that members focus on the strategic things, set the strategy and policy for the council, and then they have a legitimate expectation that officers will deliver on those. And they should leave them then to deliver the operational detail. Things can go badly wrong when you confuse those two roles, because you would then get operational planning influenced by improper considerations which may be political rather than the reasons for the delivery of the service, which are often statutory. So, I mean, that's a somewhat long-winded answer, but there isn't a black and white answer to that.
Oh, Councillor Keith.
Councillor Keith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I just ask, on your report, you've stated that there's a lot of the officers who were involved have either left or have been disciplined and sacked. Can I ask you why you haven't named any of them? You've just put the actual job titles, and the same goes for cabinet members as well.
I mean, it just seems fairer to do that. I don't think it helps people's ability to understand the criticisms rained by naming people individually. I think if you give the titles of those people, it's clear what function they held and what the expectations would have been of them in that role. In these kinds of reports, auditors usually adopt that approach just out of fairness.
Try and say it again. I'm not.
Are there any other questions? No? Councillor Evans.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to name the individuals, if I can legally do so. Madam Mayor, I would like to name the individuals, if we can legally do so. Okay. This report highlights the failings of many officers and certain councillors. Officers seem to have been let go or moved on, rather than outright sacked, yet elected members are mainly still in a position of authority. So whilst the leadership of this council have supported the removal of officers, they have not instigated the same restraint within their group. Councillor Paul Bayliss led this authority through a period that cost the authority millions, 1.2 million, of unnecessary expense, whilst allowing a cabinet member, Sarah Russell, bully officers into making decisions.
Councillor Evans, you're making a statement, you're not asking a question. Okay?
Questions to Mr Jones at the moment.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to ask a question.
Are there any other questions for Mr Jones?
Councillor Webb. Councillor Webb.
Councillor Webb.
In view of my earlier question about this being a comprehensive report and your reply that it wasn't, do you consider that the recommendations and the action plan that is being put forward would be sufficient to guarantee that all issues, either inside or outside of this report, will be covered by those actions?
No, you can never offer such a guarantee. All I can say is that we undertook a report to look at governance issues, and particularly governance issues around the delivery of major projects. Clearly, we also looked at political behaviours within the council, and we've made recommendations which we would hope would improve governance in relation to project management, accountability, transparency of the way that you hold meetings, reporting, member behaviour, standards and conduct. And all of those should help you operate more effectively across the board, but it can never guarantee that you will uncover everything which is either going on well or indeed badly. So you can never offer that, but it will strengthen governance, which is important. And I think my starting point was to say, if one sees the national picture, local government can be a beacon of good practice against that background, because people are confused at the moment, and you can exemplify good practice in the way that you conduct yourselves.
Are there any other questions?
Councillor Evans.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you. Can I just name the other two individuals?
Councillor Evans. Can I just remind you, this is a question to Mr Jones. It's not a statement.
Okay, I can ask Mr. Can I ask Mr Jones if these two
names
are correct?
Jones anything you like, yes.
Mr Jones, can you confirm that on the taxi licensing, the individuals are Councillor Sandhu and Councillor Nawaz?
Not prepared to comment on that, because I said at the outset I wouldn't comment on individuals.
A final call for any more questions.
Councillor Harwood.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Do you feel that the Audit and Accounts Committee, during the period of time that this was taking place, did an adequate job in their deliberations? Do you feel that there were failings in that department as well?
In terms of the actions of the Audit and Accounts Committee, you can only review those things that you're made aware of. One of the things that the report outlines two matters which are directly relevant to the Audit and Governance Committee. One was that you weren't reported all of the waivers which related to the payroll project, and you can't act upon those things which you don't know about. So that's the importance of actually reporting things to members in the appropriate committees. On that instance, it didn't happen. And additionally, there is an allegation by officers at the time that some reports were watered down before they actually came to the Accounts and Audit Committee. And if that is the case, you can't act upon the things which you don't know about. So the Accounts and Audit Committee acted properly, in my view. but was not necessarily always presented with the information it needed to carry out its job.
I'd like to thank you for that comment, and I'm relieved at your answer, because obviously, from my point of view, having been on the Audit Accounts Committee for a considerable time, I find it
Councillor
rather
Harwood,
disappointing.
Councillor Harwood, no, it's questions. Okay, thank
Well,
you.
I've made my point. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank you, Mr Jones, for your input this evening, and open up the chamber for debate. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Much will be said about this report this evening. Blame will be apportioned and points scored. However, I just think we should take a step back and consider how the report's contents are seen by the ordinary, informed Derby citizen. The man on the Mackworth bus, if you like. The vulnerable woman in the back of a yellow taxi. The newcomer to this country who came to the city of Derby to escape corruption and malpractice. These people have been fed the line time and time again, to the exclusion of all other arguments, that what is happening in Derby is all because of unprecedented government cuts. If that's the case, they ask, why is it that Derby seems to have been singled out for this harsh treatment, unlike other comparable authorities? Why can you go to neighbouring South Derbyshire and find the traffic islands in full bloom, or the swimming baths open in Amber Valley, and the CAB fully functional in Erewash, or live culture and performing arts facilities thriving in Nottingham and Leicester? Why is it that Derby cannot even afford to pump recycled water round its own marketplace fountain? Well, this report gives them the answer, Madam Mayor. The informed citizen can deduce from its pages questions about the political manipulation of the council's own constitution, of funds spent without legal authority, and biased decisions made that have not simply endangered the safety of the travelling public, but spread the fear that it is no longer safe to take a cab home after a night out. Worse still, it stokes fuel to the fire of the boneheads who peddle the wicked lie that ethnic minorities are in some way less honourable than the majority. Grant Thornton's report makes it clear to the public that it's not true that there was no money to spend, but that decisions have been made for the wrong reasons and that resources have been spent in the wrong places. The informed person on the bus may also deduce that this report is but the tip of an iceberg, pulling its punches from the whole can of worms that Derby's administration has become. This situation tarnishes us all, Madam Mayor. The public are not concerned with our partisan squabbles. We're all seen as being at the bottom of the immoral heap. Drastic action is needed, and much level-headed consideration of changes needs to be undertaken in the coming weeks, Madam Mayor. And the proposed action plan just does not cut it, not as it stands at the moment. Root and branch changes need to take place, and fast. Many ordinary Derby folk think that this should begin at the top. In a week when leaders are falling on their swords, perhaps it's time for ours to do the same. To paraphrase the Prime Minister, it might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the city's interest. I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go.
Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to draw attention to the area of this report that comments on involvement of members in the decision-making process at this authority. The report is very critical of two particular members' involvement in the situation around pay for refuse workers that occurred back in 2014, namely Councillors Russell and Bayliss. In short, we have a situation whereby a new pay deal for refuse workers was not well received, with political pressure and interference in a decision to avert a potential strike close to an election that ended up costing the Derby taxpayer £3 million. This is clearly political pressure and interference that had no place in this process. In spite of advice of the then Chief Exec that said that detailed involvement would not be normal practice in such a process, Councillor Russell, according to a testimony in this report, forcefully instructed the action to be implemented. Action, she was told, was not justifiable. Action that would result in us all paying an extremely heavy price. Of course, Councillor Russell refutes this version of events, so I'd ask her to give us her take on how she considers events unfolded. The problem we have, though, is that her word is against someone else's, as there is no evidence of any meetings, as they appear to be unminuted, and the decision itself was not approved in writing. And as the report states, this was not untypical of the way some decisions were made at this time. That is outside the constitution of the Council, through a variety of shadow structures which senior officers and politicians dipped in and out of. I quote the report: according to a former officer, reducing the pay for refuse workers was unpalatable to members, who repeatedly stressed that any such pay reduction could result in strike action. As the new pay arrangements were implemented on April 1st, 2014, officers state that members were concerned any strike action that may take place to the date of the Council's May election, which could be potentially politically damaging. The imminence of the election should not, in our view, have been a relevant consideration in terms of determining pay. Pretty conclusive and damaging words. There are many words that could describe this mess. The one I will use is contempt. The then Cabinet leader, and particularly Councillor Russell, has shown complete contempt for the political and constitutional processes of this Council, but worst of all, contempt for the very people you are elected to serve. We come to this chamber, meeting after meeting, and hear how wicked and bad the government is from the Labour group, when members of that group have coerced a situation for political motives and charged us all for the privilege. Funny, there is no mention of this financial disadvantage the Labour group has put us in when stating how much the authority has to save, or when swimming pools have to be closed, or when local charities and the COB have their funding stopped. I think Labour owe it to this city to pledge to ensure this situation can never happen again, because, and it may come as no surprise, that this group has a long-held belief that the Labour group is not fit to run this council, and this report has all but confirmed our suspicions. This misuse of funds has of course come at a huge financial £3 million cost to this city, but let us not forget the heavy price that will have to be paid with regards to the loss of public trust in politics. Such is the magnitude and seriousness of the issues highlighted in this report, some might suggest those members involved should seriously consider their positions. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Ralston.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Having read the report in full and listened to the discussions here tonight, it's obvious that the auditor's report clearly highlights the inappropriate use of significant amounts of money of public funds by this council. In particular, £3 million of taxpayers' money has been spent on what was clearly a politically motivated purpose, directly attributable to the interference by members of a Labour-led authority. Due to pressures from unions and the desire to avoid serious industrial action prior to the 2014 local elections, which they feared might influence the result of and undermine their control and administration of this council. In order to ensure that refuse workers were not adversely affected and in order to directly avoid strike action prior to the election, the Cabinet Member for Business, Finance and Democracy, together with the Leader of the Council, inappropriately invoked an assimilation rule to the process. This ensured that those workers affected starting point under JE was 20,000 rather than the 18, which was proposed in the original model. As a direct consequence of that action, the same assimilation rule had to be applied to employees' pay scales across the council under JE at a total amount of £3 million to the public purse. The report we are referring to here today clearly explains in page 16, section 66, that despite the former Director of HR raising concerns directly to the Chief Executive that, and I quote, "this was not justifiable and would cost £3 million more," the Cabinet Member for Business, Finance and Democracy instructed her forcefully to action the option. The report shows on page 8, section 30, a decision to change direction from the family modelling approach that was taken in September 2012, shortly after Labour took control of the Council in May. The auditors highlight clearly that this was an important moment in the project. The Council should have formally considered whether to re-tender at that point, but didn't. It wasn't until 2014 this Council was forced to redo the evaluation and in its entirety using Hay, leading to a further inappropriate use of public funds of £5 million. The officers involved have either left the authority or faced disciplinary procedures. Bearing in mind the seriousness of these circumstances, the member involved, the ex-leader and the responsible Cabinet members need to be brought to account for their involvement and be subject to an inquiry by the Standards Committee. What the auditors have concluded in this report is not a consequence of government reductions in funding, but a direct result of this Labour authority's actions, resulting in Labour adding additional financial pressures to Derby. This is another case of Labour imposing cuts to other services which would have otherwise been avoidable if members had acted and had not inappropriately interfered with JE. £8 million. Add to that all the other financial implications detailed in this report, estimated to total around £10 million. What could Derby have spent that on? Keeping services such as the assembly rooms, swimming pools? Just a couple of examples of what Derby could have had if this authority stopped playing political games, put Derby first and followed the constitutional rules of this authority. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Council heard my question earlier to the Auditor relating to this debate, and I contain my comments solely in relation to taxi licensing and the paragraphs 87 to 98. It is pleasing to note a fair amount of comment is historic, and particularly in relation to decision making in the subcommittee context. And I do believe, in view of the action plan submitted by the Labour administration, that several matters have or are being addressed. These, though, stem from mainly a debate relating to the Casey Rotherham report, which brought into play new monitoring standards, albeit not as strong as I would have wished, as this Council, and it's already mentioned, this Council weakened the Casey recommendations on what was significantly what is called legal opinion, which is yet to be tested. I mentioned it in the audit as it did refer to members of the committee either previously holding licences or still holding taxi licences, which I believe still brings about a clash between personal and professional interests on that committee. That now aside, I refer now to para 98 relating to a member whom from the report is identified as Councillor Nawaz, as involving himself in discussions between an officer and the taxi vehicle proprietor, which were deemed unhelpful by the officer, to say the least, and certainly worthy of mention by the auditor. I therefore need reassurance that such interventions will not take place in the future, and there is a strict monitoring regime in place for officers to report such matters, and if substantiated, those matters are sent direct to Standards Committee for sanction, certainly if proven. Such will be an additional amendment at the conclusion of the report, of my speech, sorry. Secondly, and I had personal involvement in this issue relating to the audit's commentary relating to paragraph 96 and 97, and concerns expressed forcefully as the member committee leadership of Councillor Sandhu, and his repeated attempts following lobbying from taxi licence holders to reverse the legitimate and legal decision of the committee to requirements of both DBS and medical certification before issue of the 3-year licence, brought into being just before the end of the year. I say repeated attempts because whilst the auditor cites only one paper submitted by the chairman, which was January of this year, I am aware of at least 3 other attempts previously made with officers present and by circulation of email, which I personally objected to. I advised the councillor on several occasions as to his duty to the citizens of Derby, not to those lobbying him from the trade. While this attempt to undermine the committee decision was eventually dropped, it is clear from the auditor's report that it seems so symptomatic of the lack of governance within taxi licensing that he specifically highlights this particular poor management and decision making by the chairman and suggests under recommendation 5 that the council take robust action where members have exceeded their proper role. It is my submission that in this instance members themselves should take robust action in order to give back a level of integrity from the chairman downwards in administration of the licensing system. Otherwise, we achieve nothing if it is kicked into the long grass with the same chairman still in that same position. I therefore call upon, by way of amendment to the action plan, that Councillor Sandhu stands down from the position of chair and is subjected to investigation by standards as to what other sanction, if any, should be imposed for this lack of judgment and key duty to the citizens of Derby. Without such action supported by members within this chamber, I fail to see how we can forward either in a position of integrity, both for members of the licensing committee, and to bring about trust from members of the public in the robustness of the taxi licensing regime within the city. Furthermore, without such action and acceptance, it shows total disregard to the recommendations outlined by the auditor under 5, 6 and 7. I move the amendments as outlined, Madam Mayor, in the amended paper under the action plan.
Can I second those recommendations, please, Madam Mayor? The proposal is from Councillor Barker. It's in respect of a requirement for Councillor Sandhu to stand down.
Be referred to the standards.
And be referred to the Standards Board. It's as simple as that.
Madam Mayor, just for clarity, Councillor Barker has suggested, and it has received a second from Councillor Poulter, that an addition to the action plan is that Councillor Sandhu stand down as the chair of General Licensing Committee, and that Councillor Sandhu be referred to Standards Committee for investigation. Madam Mayor, as we are in unusual circumstances, the Council is entitled to debate that suggestion, and then there will be a vote on whether that is included in the action plan. Any speakers?
Any speakers wishing to debate that?
Move to the vote if not.
Okay then, shall we move to the vote, please?
A recorded vote, please, Madam Mayor.
Yep, that's fine. You can take a seat while we just do the technology. Thank you. David's just doing the technology and then we read out for the recorded votes. Okay.
Right, okay.
Would members please indicate whether they are for or against the amendment as I call out your names. Councillor Afzal. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Ashburner.
For.
Councillor Banwaite. Councillor Barker.
For.
Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bolton. Councillor Kerr. Councillor Carr.
For.
Councillor Dinser. Councillor Eldred. Councillor Evans. Councillor Froggatt. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Heselgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hudson. Councillor Hussain. Councillor Ingle. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Pegg. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shankar. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Turner. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Whitby. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wood. Councillor Wright. The Mayor, Councillor Winter.
So the amendment is lost. So if we can carry on, please, with the speakers, and it's Councillor Matthew Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There could be an incorrect assumption drawn from the report that the appointment of Aquarius in March 2012 was flawed due to their inability further down the timeline to legally carry out Hay methodology. But for that to be the case, it would have to be the case that Aquarius were originally tasked and procured to carry out Hay methodology and then subsequently couldn't do so. Well, I can tell you that that was not the case. A family model approach was chosen and formed the basis of the procurement and subsequent job evaluation project as scoped and accepted by the Cabinet at the time, delegating to officers to take forward. It was only in September 2012, after the approach was changed by the incoming administration, that Aquarius were asked to carry out the Hay methodology. A fundamental change in the process, and at this point is where the course of action should have been to reassess and re-procure the project, because it had significantly changed. Whilst I accept the report's findings, I feel that there needs to be clarity in separating the key decisions of the process made by the two different administrations in the project timeline. The decision to use Hay methodology later in the process, after the original procurement was carried out based on a family model, cannot be retrospectively highlighted as a flaw of the original procurement. It was not a concern that Aquarius could not carry out Hay methodology during the original procurement, as they were not being asked to carry out Hay methodology, nor would they be asked to carry it out as part of any future change to the project, as specified and originally agreed. It's also not a consideration to procure based on the possibility that a future administration may or may not have a different approach or seek to rescope the project. And point 30 in the report specifically highlights the critical moment to my mind. It states this was an important moment in the project, as the Council's then senior officers should have reconsidered whether the consultant had engaged was able to deliver the work required in accordance with the change specification. And that refers to the point where the incoming administration decided to change from the family-based model, which was their right politically, to a Hay model or part Hay model. And in saying that, just to set the scene of the two very different decisions that were made from the original procurement decision and the subsequent change by the incoming administration, there are areas of significant concern that the report highlights, and I think that need still further scrutiny. the author of the report has suggested that it's not his job to suggest future actions. Well, the report does suggest that, it states that whilst members properly needed oversight of the project, they were, in our view, involved at the wrong level in some areas, for instance, being engaged in the detailed discussions relating to the emerging pay model. The members involved argue that this detailed involvement enabled them to head off potential issues in discussions with the unions. That, however, was unusual according to external consultants involved. Now, it goes on to say the Cabinet Member for Business, Finance and Democracy, Sarah Russell, at the time, also insisted on day-to-day involvement with the project, although the Chief Executive at the time had informed her that such detailed involvement would not be normal practice. So members' involvement is key in this, both in the management and the subsequent mismanagement of what occurred after the decision to change to Hay methodology in 2012. And that led to, as my colleagues have already inferred, I think it was Councillor Ralston, the total spend on job evaluation to spring 2016, the report says, was in the order of £5 million. But the Council has estimated that the mismanagement of the project associated with the Aquarius contract has cost the Council an additional £1.2 million, as well as imposing stress on staff through prolongation of the process, and staff have left, and it's left significant damage to the Council reputation and also the structure of the Council. It's unacceptable. It's an absolute mismanagement of a key project in the Council, one of the most, if not the most important projects that the Council had in recent history. It's not acceptable. There needs to be people to be held to account. I don't think, in my opinion, that members have properly been held to account as a result of this report as yet, and I would seek that to happen.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I'd like to draw everybody's attention to item number 117 in the report. And this talks about the blurring of lines that has occurred, whereby we have meetings in the Council that are attended by non-Council officers, non-members, etc. Now, it also refers to the cabinet meetings or non-constituted cabinet meetings that were held. Now, let's be honest and let's be fair. I've been on this council now for a number of years and been on a number of different cabinets. I've been on a wholly Conservative cabinet, I've been on a Conservative Lib Dem cabinet, and I've been on a Conservative and, believe it or not, Labour cabinet. And all of those cabinets had these meetings. We used to call it pre-cabinet. Don't know what you guys call it now, and I can't really remember what it was called in the past, but we've all had them. And what this has highlighted is that actually we're at risk here if we have people coming into our meetings that are not members of the council, if they're not indeed actually signed in as visitors. A number of years it's annoyed me that I've seen people coming in and out, especially in members' areas, who haven't got passes, who are just walking around, you know, nilly-willy. That's got to stop. And I'm glad that there's a recommendation in the report to make sure that unrestricted access is not allowed anymore, and that access to restricted papers is not allowed anymore. What I would like to see is take that a step further. There will be times, we all know there'll be times when we have these pre-cabinet meetings where we will need to ask some questions of the officers who have that professional knowledge. If that is going to happen, I would like to see it recorded. I'd like a log kept of every time an officer is invited in or asked in, and I'd also like that officer to be accompanied either by a PA or another officer who can take minutes of that meeting, so that there's a paper trail, so that we know that we can then follow the right, correct procedures. I don't think that's too much to ask. I'm not laying blame at anybody. I'm saying we need to tighten up our procedures. And I myself have done things like that in the past by tightening our procedures. I actually stood and made Eric Pickles, who was then the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, when he came to visit us here, I made him stand downstairs in the lobby and I made him type in his name in the passes. I made him wear his pass and I escorted him all the way around and he wasn't going anywhere without that security pass. That's not too much to ask. We need to make sure that we follow the rules and constitution of this council so that we can always, always hold our head high and always make sure that we are doing the right thing for the people of this city and that we are doing it properly and that we are doing it according to the rules and the constitution of this council. We need to make sure that we are above board and we can always do that. There are some items in the action plan that you'll see we've done there that I hope will tighten up those standards. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, for listening to me. Thank you, and I hope you will take on board those actions.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's legitimate, it says in the report at page 68, for a council to consider the impact of pay changes on key groups of workers. However, in this instance, the pay option chosen appears to have been influenced by political considerations which were never explicitly articulated. That means never recorded. There is no way we can trace back as to what happened during those meetings. It lacked transparency. And this council has lacked transparency for some time. Taxi licensing. And we had the Casey report, which went to which was about licensing. And it's in here at paragraph 87. And it came to this council and a decision was made about restricting the members and membership of the Taxi Licensing Committee so that, as it says in the report, fit and proper people should be licensed, but in the case of members, that members should be whiter than white on that committee. They should not have interests that could affect the decision-making process. And then, as Councillor Williams has just iterated, we move on to the political cabinet, and that really disturbs me, because we have people that are effectively members of the public being given confidential information that we, as normal councillors, not cabinet members, but normal backbench councillors, are not aware of. And to give members of the public that information, even though they are political representatives, and influence the decision-making process of our cabinet, as highlighted in here, is not transparent. No, I will not name. We all know who we're talking about in this chamber, and James Shires. That member or that person had unfettered access into a member's area. Fortunately, as a result of this, an action taken by the monitoring officer, that access has now been withdrawn and we are seeing a clearer way forward with regard to governance. And then finally, the influence of politicians on our officers. be they officers who were representing this council or now represent this council. And they were indicated too that they should not be giving out bad news. If we've done something wrong, if there has something gone wrong with this council and its processes and procedures, the public has a right to know. We shouldn't be putting a gloss on it. The governance of this authority, as we see in the action plan, is being tightened. I've been a member of local authorities variously since 1979. I have never seen one of these reports before, and I don't want to see another one again. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Up here.
Let's go nearer, Bill.
A bit nearer, Bill. Just a minute.
Getting a bit nearer. There we go. Just getting a bit more.
No, it's up front, isn't it?
Okay, that's all right. Leave me alone, please. Yeah, what I'd like to ask if those people that have been mentioned in this motion can be present to speak for themselves. Instead of us putting them apart, we don't even know what's gone. We only maybe taking the words of no that to put it on a paper. I'd like to see them here so we can ask them questions directly to themselves, if that's at all possible.
It's all right, we're just noting that.
Yeah.
Is it Councillor Poulter?
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So far you've heard some of the concerns of the Conservative group here tonight. Earlier on you heard Mr Jones refer to a culture within this council which was not right. This council has rules, it has a constitution, it has procedures, it has proper ways of doing business. The problem with the culture of this council was, and to some extent is, that the council does not follow its own rules. That is the crux of the matter in respect to this, and we're having to deal with the consequences of that. As a consequence, we're trying to organise an action plan here to deal with these matters properly. This is not something minor. This is something that should never occur, occurs very rarely, and something that we, as a group, never want to see again. To that end, I'm going to introduce a variety of amendments to the action plan. There's a copy on the side here for everybody else to consider. I'll wait whilst that's circulated, perhaps.
I second that, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, if it helps, the amendments I'm proposing are contained on the right-hand column under progress and comments, noted as additional. The action plan, any action plan of this council to deal with such any action plan of this council to deal with such a serious matter needs to allow for free and open scrutiny of the action plan and its consequences, and to progress and make sure that it is addressing the necessary issues. This current action plan falls short in that respect. The purpose of the amendment to the motion is this: where amongst the actions taken or the further actions planned, where it's identified that a register needs to be kept in relation to that particular recommendation, there needs to be, following on from that, a further recommendation that the details of that register and matters that come to mind in relation to those recommendations, it has to be taken somewhere for further scrutiny. It clearly, the recommendation spells that out. It spells in each case where those findings and those regulatory bodies need to be reported. This is a serious matter. The scrutiny of this report and the action plan in relation to this report does not stop here tonight. It needs to go on, and it needs to be carried on in the proper manner until such times as the council and the public of Derby are satisfied that all these things have been addressed. So that is the rationale behind the amendments that you see under the additional column on the right-hand side. I have one further recommendation in relation to what we've heard tonight, the concerns that have been expressed by my colleagues. There are clearly, the auditing officer clearly found it necessary to remark on and identify the actions of 4 existing members of this council. If we as a city and we as a council are going to persuade the members of this city that we're serious about looking at this, there's only one way forward in respect of those concerns that have been raised, not by us as Conservatives, not by the Liberal Democrats, and certainly not by you as a Labour group. It's the auditor that's raised these concerns. The only way to properly deal with those concerns is a recommendation that I'm going to make, that those 4 officers named, i.e. members named, namely Councillors Bayliss, Councillor Russell, Councillor Nawaz and Councillor Sandhu, are referred to the Standards Committee for an inquiry into the circumstances as noted in the auditor's report. That's a firm recommendation from me tonight to the council. If that recommendation is not accepted, I have that referral made out already, and it will be made to the standards agents as of Monday morning. To the standards agency as of Monday morning. You have an opportunity here to acknowledge to the public of Derby that you are serious about taking this report into account and dealing with it. If you don't do that tonight, then we'll do it on Monday morning. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, just to be clear, I seconded the motion amendment and reserve my right to speak.
Does anybody want to speak on the amendments?
Councillor Kerr.
Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Poulter, for your amendments. Having looking through those amendments, it would have been helpful, as this report was circulated to your group and other group leaders a couple of days ago. If you had come to us with these amendments, I'm sure our group could have taken a lot of the amendments into this administration's action plan and incorporated those. I'm reluctant to accept them on the hoof now, here presented to us at this meeting, but what you can be reassured of is we'll take these additional recommendations, look at those, and where we can agree, put them into the action plan. Like I say, a lot of them are worthy of going into the action plan, having an initial look at them, but some of them I'm concerned are going to be quite cumbersome on the monitoring officer and particularly the chief executive. But where they can be built into the administration's action plan, we'd welcome that and would do that. As far as your threat to report individual members to the Standards Board, and that's what it is, I advise our group not to bow to that threat. That right has been available to you since the report came out. You can do that, and that's just not necessary to be brought here to full council. You can do that with the powers you've got already.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I start by asking that we take the two parts of the Conservative proposal and vote on them separately? So the ones that's here in writing and the suggestion about the individual councillors, because I think they are separate issues, and I would request that we take those as separate votes.
Councillor Kerr, just for assistance, Councillor Poulter has recommended these as a comprehensive document. He hasn't asked for these to be gone through individual and didn't propose separate amendments for individual items. He's doing it with a comprehensive issue, so it's all or nothing.
No, I think that's misunderstood. The document that we've had circulated, I would like to take as a single document. But the discussion about the councillors, I'd like to take as a separate vote. No, okay, that's fine. But regarding the document that's been circulated and the additional comments, in broad terms, I think that there's something, and I'm pleased to hear that Labour are willing to take those on board. My concern actually comes through from the first point, the first additional one related to job evaluation point 1, where it says member involvement in detailed operational matters. So those should be recorded. Now, as councillors, we have two very different roles. We have a role within the administration of the council. Obviously, the cabinet members have a much larger role for that than ourselves as backbenchers, but as backbenchers, we have a responsibility in that too. We also have a role as representatives of the people within our wards. And when it comes down to representing people within our wards, there are many times when I, and I'm sure other members, are talking one-to-one about a particular operational case relating to something in our ward, whether that's to do with a parking ticket someone's been issued, whether it's to do with a planning issue, whether it's considering the design of a highway scheme that was being implemented in our wards. There are many times when we are advocating on behalf of individuals. And I don't want in any way that role of advocacy to be felt to be something that is wrong for myself as a councillor and for other councillors in this chamber. So in terms of the wording, the intention I understand, but the use of those words as it's described, I think is wrong. And we need to be very sure that we're not going to end up implementing something that we are not comfortable with, and therefore we shouldn't do it. So as they stand, and I haven't got alternative words, but I think it's something that maybe the Conservative group can think about and give us some advice on, because I do appreciate, and I appreciate the discussive nature of our session today. So I hope that can be taken on board.
Councillor Nater.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just talking on the amendment on recommendation 5 and 6. I don't know whether this is the appropriate place to bring the matter up. And I was just including, if we're talking about, taxi licensing, I'd look to put additions in terms of planning applications as well. I don't know if that's where it sits, but I just felt that I had to bring that into the mix.
Councillor Ashburner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've been advised that the proposed action plan was written by the Labour group. We received a copy on Wednesday evening, not much time to contribute positively to the plan. That all of there needs to be ongoing ways in which other groups can contribute positively, and that the plan be continually updated. For example, there are ongoing issues to do with waste of money and questionable legality relating to the special educational needs issues. Thank you.
Councillor Matthew Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in reaction to Councillor Kerr's contribution, I don't think she needs to worry because the issue here is dealing with the concerns highlighted in the report. For example, the inappropriate behaviour of members in regards to potentially influencing licensing decisions, for example, or their involvement in key contract decisions or change of approach which then subsequently costs the taxpayer millions of pounds. We're not talking about your day-to-day ward work where you may be lobbying for a pavement to be resurfaced or lobbying in some way to ensure that you're on the list for resurfacing. If you're a cabinet member in charge of highways, you have been in the past, you have to be careful. You have to work within the council constitution and the framework to do the right thing based on the code of conduct and all the other things that are in place. What we're saying here is there needs to be more scrutiny, more procedures in place to ensure and give public the absolute guarantee that we're doing everything we can moving forward to avoid the problems that have been highlighted in this report, significant problems that have had huge impact on this council for the officers within this council, members within this council, and more importantly, the public that have put us in this position. And it's about ensuring that this administration moving forward and future administrations moving forward adhere to that very strict framework which is in place for the right reasons. We're talking about tightening up that framework, putting in every effort that we can, every level of scrutiny that we can to ensure that this does not happen again. These kind of things that have been highlighted in the report don't happen again. We don't feel without our amendments that we can guarantee, we can be sure that won't happen again without those amendments put in place. That's what we're talking about, Councillor Kerr, and I don't think you have to worry that it would unduly impact on your day-to-day work as a ward councillor. I think we all do that and we do it well and we work within the framework. If anyone steps out of line or does something inappropriate, there's a standards committee that you would be referred to. And that's always been the case. So please have confidence that this is for the right reasons and it is something which we feel very strongly that needs to be put in place, and we strongly urge you and your group to support us in that aim.
Councillor Poulter, would you like to sum up? Then we'll move to the vote.
Briefly, Madam Mayor, yes, thank you. Just in response to Councillor Shanker, really. Yes, apologies for not giving it you beforehand, Councillor Shanker. The fact is that time's been tight. I actually only received or actually finalised and printed copies of the final version at 10 to 6 tonight, so that 10 minutes probably wouldn't have been much assistance to you. Part of the rationale or the reason for that is that you raised concern about whether it would cause undue problems with the monitor officer's time and things. I have actually run these amendments past the monitor officer and got an agreement that they are achievable and would tie in with the action plans, so nothing to worry about that. In terms of the rest of it, it's not really a threat in terms of referring the named members to the Standards Office. It's a fact. It's what we will do. The reason, yes, we have had opportunity to do that previously, but we felt in response to the auditor's report, tonight was the appropriate place to raise it an issue. And as I said previously, we wanted to give you, the opposition, the Labour group, the opportunity to acknowledge the seriousness of this report and to prove to the public and to us that you're going to take it seriously and you're going to take those concerns to standards to be fully investigated. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter.
Vote on the amendments, the amendment document in its entirety.
Okay, shall we vote on the amendment in its entirety?
Madam Mayor, can we ask for a recorded vote, please?
Mm-hmm.
Would members please indicate, as I read out your names, whether you are for or against the amendment, please? Councillor Afzal. Councillor Anderson. Councillor Ashburner. For. Councillor Banwaite. Councillor Barker. For. Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bolton. Councillor Kerr. Councillor Carr. Councillor Dinser. Councillor Eldred. Councillor Evans. Councillor Froggatt. Councillor Grimmadell. Councillor Harwood. Councillor Hassel. Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hudson. Councillor Hussain. Councillor Ingle. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Keith. Councillor Jangir Khan. Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Members of the public, be quiet during the vote, please. Thank you.
Councillor Nater. Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Pegg. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Raju. Councillor Rawson. Councillor Repton. Councillor Ralston. Councillor Russell. Councillor Sandhu. Councillor Shanker. Councillor Skelton. Councillor Smale. Councillor Stanton. Councillor Turner. Councillor Webb. Councillor West. Councillor Whitby. Councillor Williams. Councillor Wood. Councillor Wright. And the Mayor, Councillor Winter.
That's it, the amendment has been lost.
And we're back to the vote, back to the general debate.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to the general debate. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Liberal Democrat Group very much welcomes the External Auditor's Public Interest Report, and we want the Council to use this as a catalyst for taking a hard look in the mirror and being totally honest about the things the auditor has said. And it also needs to look at things the auditor hasn't mentioned as well. In addition, the Council needs to change its culture, because among some officers and some councillors, the culture is definitely not fit for purpose. For example, in the past there have been whistleblowers who have not been thanked for their honesty and concern. Some of these people, in our opinion, should be given a public apology. We also call on the Council to release such people from the gagging clauses that they had to sign. If these sort of things are not done, we are never going to change the culture in this place, and we need to, and it's about time everybody woke up and smelt the coffee. Moving on to the Licensing Committee. It's a committee I have been on, not now, but in previous years, for over 15 years. And I think throughout that time, there have been concerns popping up here and there. But I have become even more concerned over the influence of a few people more recently. And we read of that in this report. In paragraph 88, we read of councillors lobbying in order to try and get licences granted. In paragraph 89, we see some drivers trying to engineer which panel, and therefore which councillors, they will appear before. Separately, we've been told that some drivers sought to avoid certain councillors on those panels, while others sought to be on the panels of those same councillors. We brought this to the attention of officers at the time. In paragraph 93, we read of an enforcement officer feeling pressure being put on him by a councillor while inspecting a vehicle. In paragraph 96 and 97, the chair of the Licensing Committee comes in for serious criticism. I would also like to give a word of reassurance to the public. The vast majority of Licence Committee members are honourable and take their duties very seriously. we do not allow unrepentant people with past criminal convictions to get licences. There are people who in the past have been stupid while in their teens and early 20s and who now have grown up and put that behaviour firmly behind them. They are now no danger to anyone. And I'm sure taxi drivers themselves want to make sure that these issues are swiftly resolved for the good of their own profession. No doubt some people will object to what I've said, and I fully expect some sort of retribution for telling the truth. Maybe someone will get up in this chamber a bit later on and start telling lies about me. Or perhaps a malicious complaint will be made to the Standards Board against me. If so, that will be the 3rd time it's happened. Sadly, that's the culture of some people in this organisation.
Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, I misheard you. Just very quickly, first, in response to something, I think it was Councillor Repton asked earlier about the decision made to appoint Aquarius when I was the Cabinet member. Well, I can assure him the questions I asked very searchingly were, was the tender properly evaluated and were they confident that Aquarius were resourced to do the job? The later change to the Hay evaluations was not part of my brief. I was out of office by then. I'll go on to say the bit I'm particularly interested in is the lack of project management. You might expect me to say that as a professional project manager for Rolls-Royce for a number of years. I think we have got a serious flaw in the way we do project management here. And what I would like to see is that the project management training, proper project management training, is undertaken by the whole council for people who are going to do those jobs. And anybody who's appointed a job it should be a prerequisite that they are members, which I had the honour to be until I let my membership expire, of the Institute of Project Management. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Ashburner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a good week to hide bad news, and this is bad news indeed. The worst audit report for Derby City Council that I can ever recall seeing. I come from a railway background, where there are 2 prime rules for individuals and groups. No accidents, and if there is an accident, there must be positive evidence that I or we are not to blame. Neither have been in evidence during the last 2 years of during the 2 years of Labour misrule covered by this report. The accidents are what the report is about and contain the detail, and there are many examples of failing to record and communicate decisions, paragraphs 10, 12, 26, 32 and many others. In view of this, I would hope that internal audit will monitor communication and recording of data. I've previously mentioned that the other groups, rather than the Labour Party, be allowed to contribute and update the action plan. Hopefully this will be allowed to happen in the cool light of the ongoing time. Regarding the job evaluation project, while on the railways, I went through a job evaluation, and I know these to be extremely problematic for both employees and management. For this Labour administration to have allowed this job evaluation project to drift for some 2 years without requesting repeated briefs on progress and risks is incomprehensible. It would seem that they have no one with experience of employee relations. Perhaps their agent wasn't present when this was being discussed. Central to this was Labour's decision to change from the Aquarius approach to the Hay method in paragraph 30, without determining that Aquarius could defend their Hay-based decisions. While the change of method was defensible, the lack of their subsequent project management in paragraph 29 was not. Labour involved themselves deeply in the details of the negotiation involving refuse workers, paragraphs 62 to 67, at an extra cost of some 3 million, paragraphs 12, but not the risks that were emerging. In addition, there was a failure to recognise that the Aquarius contract was about to end, paragraph 52, and consider options before then. This continues to occur. the diary failures still occur. For Labour to trot out their habitual "it's not our fault" excuse is not believable when they have been responsible for so long. The cost, this cost Derby ratepayers some 1.2 million, paragraph 57, due to indifference to the project risks, and 3 million, paragraph 12, due to inappropriate detailed intervention relating to a small part of the workforce, both at a time when they claim to be short of government of money. It is difficult to persuade the government to pay us more in the face of such waste. There was much this money could have been used to contribute towards the voluntary sector, which is support for people in Derby, which has been cut by the Labour group. A good time to hide bad news indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We've talked a lot about what has happened and when it happened, and I feel it quite interesting. I feel a slight disconnect from it because it all took place while I wasn't a councillor in my interregnum period for the 4 years that I wasn't here. But as well as the points that have been raised here and have been highlighted in the action plan, I think there's a little bit more that we need to do as well. I asked a question earlier about the culture, and other people have mentioned the culture in the council. And it's not just the culture between members, it's the culture between members and officers. And I think we also need to look at the culture of officers to officers as well. Because it's very easy for junior officers to be fearful for their jobs when they know that they are struggling to deliver. At the moment, we know the resources are tight. We know that money is short, that we know that there are a lot of people who are picking up a lot of work that their colleagues have left them where their colleagues have gone. And it may be difficult for those people to say to their boss or to their boss's boss, "I'm sorry, we're not coping," because it may reflect back to them. And I think that is also a culture that we need to look at, to be able to become a council, the council we all want to be proud of. So I think it's important, I think it is vital that we look at the culture of our council. And in the same way as the Fire Authority has had a survey done, a review done of its culture, I think one of our priorities in our action plan should be to have a cultural review done of our council. The cost of doing that will be significant. I don't know what it'll be, but it will certainly be nothing like the millions of pounds that we know that we have spent because our culture has been wrong. When we can't afford to waste money, sometimes it's wise to spend a little money to make sure that we are spending further money wisely. So I very much hope that that is something that we can agree to do. I think there are other things that we need, more detailed things that aren't pulled up in this action plan that we ought to be looking at. I think we need to look at decisions that directors are taking in consultation with cabinet members, and to make sure that those relationships and those decisions are being taken in a way that we can be secure in and can be comfortable about. We need to look at the way, not just major projects and the way we manage our major projects, but we need to look at the way we manage all projects. Because somebody who starts off in project management won't be given the giant project to start with, but they need to learn the good practice and the mechanisms for doing project management when they start with something that is smaller and more manageable, and where making mistakes is less important, but where getting good practice and good knowledge can be vital for the future. We need to look not just at whether people are taking part in training and jumping through the tick boxes that we've hopefully all done on the screen, but we need to know that those things are being put into practice. And that is harder to judge, but it's something that we need to think about how we can judge. So I would like to include those 4 things into the action plan that we've got in front of us. Now, from the response that's been given to what was provided in writing from the Conservatives, and I'm sorry I haven't put this in writing because I didn't have time to put those thoughts together in writing and circulate it round in the short time we had to consider this paper. But I can repeat them. It's a matter of reviewing the processes between directors and cabinet members, looking at all officers and members for training, not just the senior officers, to look at all projects in terms of project management, not just the major ones, and considering how to not just do the training, but judge how we put things into practice. And finally, the most important, that cultural review. So those are the 5 points that I want us to add to this action plan. I'm very happy that we vote on them now, but what I think would be better, and if people vote down those 5 points, what I would further like to propose is that this action plan is referred to our Corporate Scrutiny and Governance Board for their cross-party consideration and for them to be have ownership of the action plan and for them to have the oversight through audit and accounts. Thank you.
Seconder? Councillor Native, seconder. Yeah. Okay.
Is she putting an amendment that then has a subject to if it doesn't go through? She has a second amendment, did you say?
No, she's got a series of 5 points
Oh, I
she wants
see.
to amend, and she wants to refer to corporate scrutiny as well as... Sorry, just for clarity, Councillor Kerr is suggesting 5 additional amendments to the current action plan that everybody is debating, and I think this is in a very brief synopsis. It's a survey on the culture of the council as it currently stands. It is the decisions that are taken between directors in consultation with cabinet members. The way that is done should be secure and robust and appropriately minuted, I think is the theme of that. Look at the way that all projects are taken forward, not just the major ones. Offer training to all officers and members in situations relating to project management, I think you were referring to. Is it generally relationships? And she was also suggesting that members will note from the report that recommendation 2.3 is to delegate the action plan to the Audit and Accounts Committee. Councillor Kerr is suggesting that it also gets referred to corporate scrutiny.
Mayor, may I just add on to that, that my 5th point was actually to make sure that we're not just doing the training, but we're putting the training into practice. And the referral, I wanted a separate vote to consider whether we want to have the corporate scrutiny being the owner of the action plan.
Yeah, but she's trying to do 2 votes. She's trying to do 2 amendments. Yeah.
In that case, Joe.
Councillor Kerr, it can only be 1 vote, not 2 votes on that.
But in that case, can I leave it for a colleague, because I don't think Joe has spoken yet, to propose that it goes as an action plan to corporate scrutiny and governance?
Madam Mayor, that is the decision to be taken by Councillor Nater. At the moment, the Council is being asked to vote on the collective amendments that you are just proposing, and that is 1 vote on whether all of the amendments that you're proposing go into the action plan or not. It's for Councillor Nater to decide if he wants to put a further amendment when he speaks.
Right. Okay, can we move to the vote then, please? All those for the amendment? And those against?
Surprise, surprise.
Yes, yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so the amendment's lost. We'll carry back to the debate.
Okay. Thank you. The amendment is lost and we'll carry on back to the debate. With Councillor Repton, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Poulter talks about the importance of rules and the importance of doing things right. And he is right on that. And I'll come back to that shortly in my speech. Earlier this evening, we had Councillor Holmes wriggling like a worm on a hook, trying to confuse the facts and the timelines, desperately trying to rewrite history and distance himself from his group's actions and responsibilities. But the opposition need to be careful about witch hunts, smears, mudslinging, trying to deflect the blame away from themselves, targeting councillors for narrow party political gains. We've seen what's happened in the last we've seen what's happened in this country in the last 2 weeks when those principles, so you can laugh, over the last 2 weeks and the consequences of those actions. I'm glad you find that funny, about the actions of the last 2 weeks that have happened. I certainly don't, and my group don't. We've seen what we need to have, and perhaps you don't support that. We'd support hope rather than hate. Yeah, but because I'm amazed that you find it quite funny. In recent weeks, we've witnessed the unedifying spectacle of the opposition councillors at their worst, throwing mud, hoping that it will stick. Apart from their hypocrisy and hyperbole this evening, we have further evidence of duplicity and a total lack of veracity on their respective parts. Tories and Lib Dems know that in March and April 2012, they, the Tories and the Lib Dems, when in power, took the decision and signed off the appointment of Aquarius. All the problems and the costs this city have endured have flowed from their bad and costly decision made at that time. This administration, by contrast, on coming to power, did then look at all the questions and all the issues and ask the right questions. It then took decisive and robust action, shining a light and tackling and resolving this and other problems we've discussed this evening. The old adage is true. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. So let me come back to Councillor Poulter's talk about it's important to follow the rules and do things right. Councillor Smalley, or should I say ex-Councillor Smalley, stood for City Council elections this year in Alistair. He did not live there. Hands up opposite who knew he did not live there.
Councillor Repton.
Councillor
Repton.
Roy, I can't see
CP50.
Roy. Did he actually live there?
CP56, not part of the report.
Was it you who nominated him?
Councillor Repton, is this relevant?
Yes, it is, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I'm talking about veracity, I'm talking about honesty. And I think in a democracy, I think it'd be helpful if I'm heard. They might disagree with me, but I think in a democracy people ought to be heard rather than shouted down, especially from the audience. So yeah, Councillor Smalley, sorry, ex-councillor, lives in Borrowash, and so does our local MP. And she either knew or should have known.
Councillor Repton. Councillor Repton, this isn't relevant.
Well, I think it is, because what I'm demonstrating here quite clearly is I'm referring back to Councillor Poulter, talking about the importance of doing things right and doing things proper.
Councillor Repton, can you focus on the contents of the report, please?
So let me finish by saying this. Be very careful when you start throwing mud, as it's likely to blow back in your own face. So our evidence not only of possible Tory duplicity and lack of veracity, but also gross incompetence, hypocrisy, opportunism, hyperbole, and a crude attempt to deflect blame and criticism away from where it rightly belongs, with those opposite and their incompetent, costly mistake. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Evans.
Madam Mayor, I have serious concerns about the culture of unminuted meetings as outlined in this report. Passing a decision orally with the clear potential of covering up your tracks in case it all went wrong is not acceptable. The Labour group then brazenly went on in 2 subsequent elections, blaming anyone and everyone for the lack of budget the council faced. They took no responsibility and yet caused a £3 million hole in our budget, a hole that still exists today. Regarding taxi licensing, it is apparent member influence on a day-to-day operations has been a normal occurrence for many years, and the report highlights a few decisions that the general public will be horrified to know have been passed. I think it is clear that officers have struggled with councillor pressure. which must be very stressful for them. The majority of taxi drivers are fit and proper, but their good names are being dragged down by the clear manipulation of political gerrymandering that should have been stopped years ago. Why have the Labour group failed to address these concerns? Why have they allowed these members to continue in this committee when they are clearly part of the problem? Councillor Banwaite, why don't you now show your leadership of your group, show your authority and show the people of Derby that integrity is paramount over political motivation? Regarding governance, Councillor Banwaite, you tried to persuade the opposition leaders that you are not to blame, and yet the section on governance disagrees with that assertion. Not only is your party falling apart nationally, but locally as well, deliberately blurring the lines on proper constituted meetings with what is tantamount to unconstitutional behaviour seems to be the norm in your world. You took over the reins in 2014, yet in November 2015, the report shows that under your leadership in the political cabinet meeting, you made a decision to reinstate the CCTV, and if it wasn't for our legal officers, this would have gone through without proper ratification. It was only then that the written guidance was produced to understand the proper role of the PCCM. The Labour group seem to have forgotten who the elected councillors are. Their arrogance is unbelievable, riding roughshod over the wishes of the people of Derby. How long has the unelected Labour Party agent, James Shires, been allowed to influence decision-making in this council? Too long, Madam Mayor. That's how long. Councillor Bayliss not only allowed James Shires to attend political cabinet meetings, but he also instructed the council to provide him with a security pass, giving him free access to the council house, a privilege only given to elected councillors. No wonder the Labour group supported remaining in the EU. Being unelected is par for the course. Clearly, this is a breach of council procedure and trust, and leaves me wondering whether James Shires had access to the pink papers. It seems logical to assume that he did, as he was being treated as a councillor in all other respects. Mr. Shires' most recent access was this month. Sorry, last month. It was June. So he had access until June this year. People need to understand that. This report talks about a breakdown of trust, quite rightly so. UKIP have been complaining about misuse of council resource for years, only to find officers' hands are tied and standard boards dominated by Labour councillors. In conclusion, Madam Mayor, this report is overdue in this council. It highlights a deep culture of political gerrymandering which seeps through the very veins of the council. The cuts that the authority has had to go through has made officers more nervous than they would normally be and has led to very serious lapses in decision making. The relationship between councillors and the council has been blurred to the point that it was difficult to see the difference between honest council activity and pure political activity. That blurring is an affront to the good name of Derby. The Labour group has sullied this city for many years and needs to make amends very quickly. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Prior to the meeting tonight, the chairman of the Audit and Accounts Committee came to me and said, "Frank, I'm glad you're on the Audit and Accounts Committee. I really am." Now, you can ask him why he said that, but I can say this to you. I am the longest serving member of the members on the Audit and Accounts Committee. And during my period as a member of the Audit and Accounts Committee, I have served under 4 chairmen. 3 were Labour. 2 are no longer with us. 1, unfortunately, probably the best, died. The other one, unfortunately, lost his seat in Ulverston. Now we've got a new one. But I can say this, that the auditors, Mr. Jones has said tonight, that there were failings of Labour-run council to bring to the Audit and Accounts Committee waivers that they should have done. Not only waivers, but other payments as well. How disgraceful that is. We had a land committee, we had a hands tied. The chairman, hopefully the Labour chairman, knew what was going on. Perhaps they didn't. Dave Roberts was very close to me as regards sharing what was going on in the Audit and Accounts Committee. And I'm sure I can say this, he didn't know. But I'll say this, that I have challenged strongly at all meetings that I've been at, with the auditors, with our monitoring officer, many, many things that I felt were completely wrong in this council as regards spending money, and particularly waivers. And a typical example of this is in the January Audit and Accounts Committee, when waivers totalled over £2 million. Yes, they were queried, because one was 1.7 million on temporary agency staff. And this at a time when they were making people redundant. And they were bringing in agency staff to do the jobs of the people that were leaving. How disgraceful is that? At the last meeting, I pointed out how disgraceful they were to let down their residents over the Citizens Advice Bureau, the very people that voted them in. Well, it seems that was just one of the things that we're doing. We've heard tonight of many, many other things that you were doing. You're an absolute disgrace. You have let Derby down so badly. I'm absolutely shocked that nobody has tonight put a vote of no confidence in you as an administration of running this council. I feel sorry for the officers who must be like the Audit and Accounts Committee, have their hands tied behind their backs. Yes, there's got to be a big change, and one of the changes that's got to come is the Audit and Accounts Committee have got to be able to do their job properly without having to resort to hearing about what is done, without notifying them of what's going on. Because without that, the Audit and Accounts Committee, probably like many other committees, are a farce, because they're just a name without any authority. Councillors, it's up to you. It really is up to you. You either get your act together or do the noble thing and go. Not just the leader, the lot of you. But it's up to you. Thank you.
Councillor Nater.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well said, Councillor Harwood. I'm just going to break this down a bit. I think a lot of the things have already been said, so I'm not going to cover old ground. A couple of bits that are about the officers not responding, and we do have a whistleblowing policy in the council, and really I've spoke to staff, and they wouldn't use it either of fear of retribution or getting into trouble. May I suggest that part of the action plan that we put in, there's a public concern at work organisation, a charity, that can look into these things and encourage whistleblowing, right? Because it's wrong. Paul, we've had this conversation, right? Because it needs to be said. And, if members can't behave appropriately, then they shouldn't be here, Councillor Harwood. You are right. And the other things, we're talking about deep failures. And Mr Jones, we're sorry about the behaviour that you've seen some of the people perform tonight. Maybe you should put that in your next audit report. Sorry, they've changed, haven't they? We're looking at project management, failure in project management throughout the council. The SEND department, prime example of this, the failures reported in implementing the new SEND reforms, repetitive restructures that show little progress indeed. We are far behind other local authorities. In fulfilling our legal duties to meet deadlines set. This is resulting in public mistrust and local anxiety within the ward and throughout the city. Right? So, steps need to be taken to gain cohesion across the council, identify issues earlier, and ensure that easier processes are implemented from the start. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, what a Friday night we're having. Appears that Lib Dems want to have a cultural revolution. UKIP want to name names, become the unofficial biographers of James Shires, whoever that might be. And Conservatives over here, whilst Councillor Wood's first statement was about not turning this into political point scoring, that was where that sentiment ended, sadly. It then went on to have a rift of calls for resignations and recorded votes and all the jazz we can muster in the bluster of this chamber. But I fear we're losing that amongst the nilly-willy, or whatever it might be, because there's actually a really serious point here. It's governance that's in the dock here. That's what this report is about. And I'll repeat here, the current political and officer leadership is committed to adopting a stronger approach to governance. So it's not about resignations, it's not about finger pointing and naming names at every opportunity. It is in fact about how we put a framework in place so we can do a better job as councillors. I've recently been re-elected as a councillor, and I still consider myself to be a rather inexperienced councillor. There is a large amount of experience in this room and a breadth of work that it takes a long time to get our heads around, and we require two things. One, the support of officers, okay? And second, is a governance framework that allows us to do our job to the best of our abilities. Now, what this meeting should have been about is how we strengthen that framework collectively, how we can all input to that, and how we can make it better going forward. I believe a lot of that is contained within this action plan. When I read this report, I can already see that a lot of the issues that are identified by the auditors are already being addressed. And we do have to take that collective responsibility for that. And unlike what Councillor Webb said, this isn't the tip of the iceberg, but nor is this a comprehensive doctrine of all the failures that may or waste in this council. We know it's not. It isn't root and branch. There is more to do, and this action plan should be a living document that goes on and continues to evolve. And Councillor Nater may not have answered the whip and called for this to go to scrutiny, but on a low level, I will reassure you, Lucy, that as my role as Scrutiny Chair of Corporate Scrutiny, I will ensure that we monitor this action plan to the progress of this action plan, and will make recommendations where possible or where seen necessary to strengthen this action plan as it goes on, as we achieve further. But tonight has turned into basically just a fight, another political bun fight, and it didn't need to. Hopefully out the back of that, after the column inches and after James Shiers has been famous, we can get on to actually doing the job with a broader, strengthened governance framework that allows us to be better custodians of public money, to make better decisions, and actually to do our job better as councillors. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Aldred.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Stanton, as always, for your wise and very good words. I think not only is it a shame that the debate this evening has been used, as Councillor Stanton said, for political point scoring and for personal attacks, it's also a bit of a shame that it's been used as an opportunity to try and rewrite history. So I just want to, using the report that's been put together by the auditors, just kind of make sure that we're clear on the circumstances, particularly as they relate to job evaluation. The procurement of Aquarius was fundamentally flawed before there was any question of changing the approach to hay, and that's highlighted very clearly in paragraph 27 of the report. Not only was there not enough involvement of senior officers in that procurement process, the evaluation wasn't done correctly. There's a suggestion that Aquarius were chosen for the wrong reasons. They weren't the lowest priced option, but also in paragraph 28 of the report, it clearly says that they couldn't deliver the whole job. And that was obvious from the very beginning. In fact, another consultancy firm had to be brought in to deliver the pay line because Aquarius couldn't do it. So, let us be clear about where the problem started. They started at the point where Aquarius was procured. However, and that was under your watch. Let us be clear about that. That was not under this administration, that was under a Conservative administration. So let us be clear about that. And as Councillor Repton said, people in glass houses should not throw stones. However, it is possible, and I'm willing to consider the possibility that you, as an administration, were victims to a certain extent in the same way that we were. And as to paraphrase, apologise, Mr. Jones, if I'm getting it wrong, but you can't act on the things you don't know about, I think was one of your responses to the questions. And I think that's really, really key. Because what is clear through the report as it relates to job evaluation is that we were given bad advice. The administration was given bad advice. Officers lied to members. There was a culture of secrecy, and officers did not report on risks as they become apparent. And I think, there are various paragraphs, but paragraph 56 which I will quote from, if I can just turn to it, says, the fundamental flaw in governance of this project, the job evaluation project, was the failure of key former officers to report emerging risks at the right time. Members were not informed of the problems in relation to this project, and you cannot act on what you don't know about. And at the point where this administration was made aware of the issues, and that was in July 2014, it was actually the Cabinet Member for Business, Finance and Democracy who was the first person who was informed of the possible problems in relation to Aquarius being able to deliver on hay on the job evaluation as it then stood. At that point, we acted very, very decisively as an administration. And in fact, it was the Cabinet Member for Business, Finance and Democracy at the time who alerted the leader to the possible issues, which led to the suspension of key senior officers and subsequently, as the audit report says, the Strategic Director of Resources being dismissed and other officers leaving the organisation. So at the point where this administration was made aware of the problems, we did act. And that is the best that we can do. We act on the information that we're given. Just to finish off, in relation to the issue around refuse workers, job evaluation was always going to have a cost to the organisation. There was never any question that there was going to be a cost to the organisation of implementing job evaluation, and that's why money was set aside in reserves from reserves in order to implement. I think what it is key to remember in relation to that group of workers is that, as we all know, unfortunately, due to the failings of the previous project, the whole job evaluation projects had to be redone, and Hay has been doing that work. The reality is, those workers that you're referring to have come out at a very similar level, and that is also referred to in the report. Paragraph 67 of the report, the auditor highlights the fact that subsequently...
Councillor Eldred, can you keep the noise down in the public gallery, please?
That subsequently, the work carried out by Hay has confirmed refuse worker pay at a similar level, essentially. So the decision to put them at that level was obviously the right decision, and that's been confirmed by a subsequent job evaluation. And also, it's important to note that redoing the project has actually added even more money to the pay bill, somewhere in the region of an additional £3 million, which suggests that actually the previous project underestimated how much it would cost to implement job evaluation. Job evaluation was a key project for this authority. It's been a key project for every single authority in the country. It was a legal requirement for us to implement job evaluation, and that's what this administration has done, and that is the work that we have undertaken to do, that previous administrations didn't manage to do, and we have completed that. So, Madam Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Let's get history right, and let's move forward from this, and let's all work together, as Councillor Stanton said, to make sure that we can do the best job possible.
Madam Mayor, under CP 65, CP 47, personal point of explanation, would you allow me to clarify, please? I have spoken in the debate, but a couple of members, Councillor Repton and Councillor Eldred, have referred to what I've said in my previous contributions, and I'd like to clarify that if possible. I'll be very concise. Councillor Eldred, you talk about rewriting history. Well, I think you're trying to rewrite the report, and that's not a good sign that lessons have been learned. Councillor Repton, you also talk about rewriting the timeline, me attempting to rewrite history in the timeline. Let me try and explain, as the personal explanation, Madam Mayor, so that Councillor Repton can clearly understand where we are with this. Okay, humour me. We've got a diesel car. This administration purchased that diesel car for council use. You inherited that diesel car and promptly drove it to the petrol station and filled it with petrol without looking at the manual. And then you're blaming us for blowing the engine up, Councillor Repton. Clearly, you need to separate fact from fiction. If you'd have pursued the family model with the adoption of Hay that we made, sorry, the adoption of Aquarius as the chosen contractor, it would have gone through on time, on budget, without any issue. The train hit the buffers when you changed the methodology. That is what needs to be made clear. You need to take responsibility for those actions and not rewrite history as you accuse me of.
Councillor Shanker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. These findings have inevitably damaged the reputation of the Council. and have called into question the actions of mainly officers who have left the authority as well as previous administrations, whether that's Labour, Conservative or the Liberal Democrats. But rather than revisit the failures of the past, I want to consider how we move forward. I would like to thank Phil Jones and Grant Thornton for the work. We welcome these findings and we have a duty to respond and to improve. I believe we've already been doing just that. Thanks to this administration, these mainly historical failures are being robustly addressed. And as Grant Thornton have recognised, under the current leadership of the Council, significant steps have already been taken to rectify many of the issues detailed in the Public Interest Report. There will inevitably be some who wish to use the meeting as opportunity to score political points, and I think we've clearly seen evidence of that tonight. But let me be very clear, these recommendations do not apply only or solely to members of this administration. As civic leaders, we all have a responsibility to ensure good governance, and we must all share a portion of responsibility from previous failures. There are recommendations in this report that apply to all of us, regardless of our party, regardless of our positions. Moreover, I feel there must be an acceptance that governance issues will at times exist in large, complex organisations, such as a local authority like Derby City Council. But as a public body, we have a duty to ensure they are not left unchecked. We have a responsibility to act with transparency, honesty and integrity at all times, which I believe we are doing. As the Cabinet Member for Regulatory Services, I have worked on a series of improvements to corporate governance over the last 2 years. With a new team of chief officers in place, we have restructured the authority to place a clear emphasis on good governance and strong leadership. For the first time, the Council as a department focused specifically on governance and corporate structure that shows how seriously we are taking our commitment to strong and effective oversight. At a time when local government is under tremendous financial pressure, we have invested additional resources to strengthen key areas such as legal services, internal audit and information security. We have implemented a comprehensive system of training for both employees and members to ensure we all are aware of our roles and responsibilities. And Madam Mayor, while it is clear that some groups have taken this process more seriously than others, I hope the findings and details of this report will focus everyone's attention. But perhaps most significantly, we have begun a long-term process of reform of our licensing procedures. In May last year, in light of the findings of the Casey report, we began an overhaul of taxi licensing. It was clear that the widespread failings that were brought to light in Rotherham must never be repeated elsewhere. As such, we have been proactive and comprehensive in our response. We increased the number of members on taxi licensing subcommittees from 3 to 5, delegated greater powers to professional officers and amended the members' code of conduct to ensure policies and procedures were not diluted. The process has continued throughout the last 12 months, and at the last meeting of the full Council we agreed to begin a consultation of a fundamental overhaul of how we deliver our taxi licensing function. In doing so, we have given mandate to officers to consider the viability of making the taxi licensing an administrative function, whilst also working with the trade to ensure any measures that are adapted meet our commitment to consistency, fairness and transparency at all times. I am pleased to note that a draft consultation scheme has already been prepared and will be considered by the Licensing Committee later this month. We will look at taxi licensing. We must always remember that our primary responsibility is to protect the public. But we also have a duty to the trade to ensure that professional standards are maintained and the reputation of many fit and proper drivers in our city is upheld. I know there will be many who have reservations about such significant changes. We have to administer this service, and my door is always open to any councillor, as Councillor Barker has taken that opportunity, or anybody in the public who wishes to discuss any concerns. Our reaction to this report must be effective and proportionate. I welcome the report, and we are committed to making sure this authority has the best governance that we can. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Banwait.
Yes, sir, thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I was really hoping that we would have constructive debate, constructive feedback, cross-party. A few weeks ago, I invited all the group leaders into a meeting to talk about this report. We got the advice from the Chief Executive that this report makes it clear that this is about elected members, lay members, on the whole, receiving bad advice. And that bad advice goes back many, many years and transcends many administrations. But actually, we've not had, on the whole, a constructive debate. Let's deal with the party politics and the cheap party politics from the various parties tonight. Let's deal with UKIP. I don't think we should take lectures from a councillor that was in the Derby Evening Telegraph in court for election irregularities, and I believe that case is still pending. We are not going to take lectures from you, Councillor Evans, and you've still got to hold account, and that is a matter of the law, Councillor Evans.
Yeah. Councillor Banwait.
And in terms of, well, I've moved on to the next point now.
No, I'm not stopping you for that. Yep. No. Can you remove that, please? I find that very offensive. Can you remove that, please? Thank you. Can you please remove the banner and be quiet?
I hope you please with yourself, Mr. Banwait. You ruin our lives.
Carry on, Jack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're not. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're not going to take lectures from somebody that was up in court recently, and that case is still pending for election irregularities. So, with all intents and purposes, Councillor Evans, potentially you shouldn't be here anyway, and that's a matter of the law. In terms of the Liberal Democrats, as it says in the report, this is a cross-party issue in terms of governance. If you look at one of the case studies highlighted in the report about one of the bad decisions that were taken, Councillor Skelton, you sat on that committee. You were part of that decision-making process. And if you talk about, Madam Mayor, can I just say I'm dealing with the facts here, and if you ask for the facts, and if you ask for the information of the monitoring officer, you'll find out the names of the people that are on those committees. But I'll come back to the point that I made earlier, and I'll finish on that, about bad advice. Let's look at job evaluation. It's easy for the Conservatives to try to attempt to rewrite history. That's already been mentioned. If I point you to page 7 of the report, procurement of the consultant, this is an important element. Councillor Holmes has been going on about job evaluation for the last couple of years. And what we've acknowledged, we've said this is about bad procurement. Procurement which happened on their watch. The reality is you laid the foundations of the collapse of the procurement process, the collapse of the job evaluation. And just look at this report, and I quote, "The Strategic Director of Resources was given delegated authority by the then Conservative leader to procure a strategic partner, although we have not been able to locate a copy of the original delegation." This commenced late 2011. And I quote, "We have noted shortcomings in the procurement process." And I go on to quote, "The tender evaluation was flawed in a number of respects. Although Aquarius took out professional indemnity insurance for the contract with cover of up to £10 million, it had total assets of only £385,000 and working capital of 0.17 million. Aquarius was unable, and I quote this, Aquarius was unable to carry out the detailed plotting of the pay line which required the council to procure an additional consultant at the cost of £30,000. Hay, by contrast, would have been able to provide this service." And Councillor Carr, as I quote here, "Project management arrangements were established, but these proved not to be effective." Riddled throughout this report is about bad governance and bad advice. Councillors, we are lay people. We are there to reflect the communities we serve. We're not experts, we're not professional officers. We rely upon professional officers to give us that professional advice. And as I said to the group leaders in the meeting, what's clear here is that we've all been victims at one time or another of poor advice. And Councillor Holmes, you've celebrated in this council chamber on numerous occasions about Adam Wilkinson, the former chief exec. This report damns him, damns the strategic director. And why are they no longer here? Within months of me becoming leader, and has already been said, the moment we got advice from the monitoring officer and Councillor Russell, within Councillor Russell and I arranged a meeting, clear advice and evidence was presented to me that said there was clear wrongdoing in governance. And I took decisive action to instigate proceedings, which led initially to the suspension of the then finance director, a very, very serious and major step, which then enabled officers, our officers, to carry out a thorough investigation, which has actually now resulted in these governance proceedings. Okay. So, Madam Mayor, this is about... Well, can you allow me as Leader of the Council to at least put the report forward? So, Madam Mayor, we now move for this report to be noted.
Mayor,
thank you.
If there's no further speakers, we move to the vote to accept the recommendations in the report.
Right. Shall we move to the vote to
accept the recommendations?
Accept the recommendations.
All those in favour of the recommendations?
All those in favour of the recommendations?
All those in... Yeah, you're accepting the... So just for clarity, Madam Mayor, we're currently voting on the recommendations as there's no further contribution to the debate. We're currently voting on the 3 recommendations set out in the covering report, which is in your agenda. So, and Madam Mayor is just seeking votes for all those in favour. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's carried anyway. So
Okay.
the recommendations are accepted.
The recommendations are accepted and the vote is carried.
Close the meeting.
Thank you very much for your attendance this evening. Have a good weekend.